All right, Joey. Defensive line, the storyline, just like the offensive line. Two guys who should be in the NFL right now came back. They came back. NIL is helping Illinois right now. So I know maybe they don't get the top transfers, but boy, retaining their talent has been pretty big. And again, just the confidence in Brett Bielema and on this side of the football, Terrence Jamison to get even more out of them, help them make even more money with one more year of college development. Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, the law firm, is back. The season outlook changed completely when Isaiah Adams, Julian Pearl, and now Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph. The defensive outlook changed completely with these two returning.
Yeah, we should also say the top two storylines in this podcast are proof that Illinois has the NIL capability to make this go, right? Like everybody wants more, but Illinois has the NIL capability to retain its top talent. These four are not alone, and guys who are benefiting from NIL this year who probably could have made that jump. But yeah, to your point, I remember Illinois basketball was playing at Minnesota, and that was the final day. These two took it up to they didn't have a lot of hours to spare. I want to say they had like 8 hours to spare before they announced.
No, they knew. They knew.
Yeah, now maybe some fans were holding their breath. These guys knew they were coming back. They had videos that were edited and filmed beforehand. I'm sure they didn't do that in the same day. But yeah, dude, it changed a lot of how we look at this defense, because imagine a world where they kick off in 2 weeks and your whole secondary is gone, almost your whole secondary, and your top two defensive linemen are gone. Now, you would still have Alec Bryant, you would still have Gabe Akers, you would still have Seth Coleman, but you would feel the loss of Keith Randolph and Johnny Newton in the middle of this defensive line. So it changes. It allows Illinois to be able to feel comfortable in having their defensive front be the tone setters of their defense this year, while the back half was last year, and probably helps in a lot of ways that Luke Altmaier's weapons help him grow, and they can elevate him until he gets there. This defensive front, in an ideal world for Illinois, could probably do the same for the secondary.
All right, I told Johnny this. He has no business being back in college football.
I like how you set the arm crossed. You were just waiting. That was a very, very dad move.
But by the way, let me cook on this one. Johnny Newton was one of the most disruptive forces I have seen in the Big Ten as a defensive lineman. There's been really good ones, like obviously the Bosa brothers, phenomenal players. But as an interior disruptor, I don't know if he can do anything else. And I don't understand why he goes from, he might be a 3rd or 4th round pick last year to now, oh, no doubt, 1st round pick. Just because he came back that doesn't make any sense to me. It was kind of a weak defensive tackle draft last year. And then outside of Jalen Carter, and then he comes back and it's like, oh, this guy's definitely a 1st rounder. Maybe he was a 2nd rounder last year if he would have gone, or 3rd rounder. Like that, I would have been fine. But people were talking to him like he's a 4th or 5th round pick. I'm like, how does that make any sense? He didn't get better. Like, he's going to get better because he's Johnny. And the one thing we hear about Johnny is his work ethic, as talented as he is. And I remember I wrote a story about him, about how he flipped from Illinois to Maryland. And one of the reasons I wanted to write it is because I go, this guy's different. He's maybe not the ideal length, but you turned on his high school film and there was just, for his size, the quickness was ridiculous. Like, so I thought he was a perfect fit for Lovie Smith's defense as a 3 technique. And in this defense as a 3 or 4, he's been phenomenal. And he's just gotten so much better year after year technically with Terrence Jamison. He was my defensive player of the year in the Big Ten pick. So the fact you got that back, like imagine a world where just Keith Randolph even comes back and Johnny Newton does not. That changes completely my expectations of this entire team. The fact that you got Johnny Newton, who's basically like the Aaron Donald of the Big Ten. I'm not saying he's going to be Aaron Donald in the NFL, but he's got that type of gravity. Like, he's just going to disrupt things time after time, because all those centers and guards who are now in the NFL, now that next group of younger centers and guards has to deal with Johnny freaking Newton, who is a 1st round draft pick and had 59 pressures last year. So sorry, I just had to get on my soapbox. I don't know how he got that to be that much better of an NFL prospect just by coming back for a year. He should have been at least a 2nd rounder last year. But for Illinois to get him back, it changes my prediction of what this team's going to be.
Yeah, we should. I want to point to a 3-game stretch. Now, these weren't 3 bowl teams, right? I mean, this was Indiana, Virginia, Chattanooga. So the second, third, and fourth game of the season. 10 pressures against Indiana is an absurd number. I mean, that's just an absurd number. 7 against Virginia, 8 against Chattanooga. Again, we understand those are not the best teams to walk planet Earth. That is 25 pressures in 3 games. That is ridiculous. That's really impressive. And look, I mean, 4 against Mississippi State, 6 against Northwestern, 2 each against Michigan and Purdue, 3 against Michigan State, 6 against Nebraska, 3 against Minnesota, 4 against Iowa. That move, I mean, those are pretty good numbers. And as you mentioned, 59 to go with 4 sacks, 19 quarterback hits, 36 hurries. And I don't know that all of that accounts for Johnny Newton just being present and around in the backfield and making life difficult for a quarterback. He wrecked. I mean, at least one drive. I wish I remembered. I remember thinking he just ruined this whole drive. He completely blew it up.
Offensive coordinators have to account for him on every play. And you think of that. Like, if they're going to double team one guy on Illinois, his defensive front, it's Johnny Newton. That means you're going single on Keith Randolph, an NFL player, Seth Coleman, a potential NFL player, and Gabe Akis, a future NFL player. Like, that's what he does.
And it seems like it would be advantage Illinois.
Yeah, and we'll get into the nose tackles here, but the nose tackles will have a one-on-one battle as well with a center who they're probably bigger than. So to get him back is just an absolute coup. And then you had Keith Randolph on top of it, Joey, who's a ridiculously versatile, valuable talent, and I still feel like he's just scratching the surface of what he could be. I mean, Johnny led him in tackles for loss and sacks, and Keith was right behind, didn't have as many pressures, but was one of the top guys in the Big Ten in pressures. And I still think he's getting better and better every time he plays. So he's what the NFL is looking for in that kind of 4-eye shade, that 3-4 defensive end. Keith's got it, man, and he's just a freak of an athlete for his size.
Yeah, Illinois has obviously been high on Keith Randolph. I think people who watch Illinois see Keith Randolph and understand. Starting to see Keith Randolph get his flowers a little bit more this offseason than we've seen really to this point. And yeah, look, the story on Keith Randolph is pretty well told at this point. He was very late to football, basically goes out his first practice and gets an offer. He's like, well, all right. I mean, I guess this is my path. And there's still an adjustment, there's still a physical adjustment. You still got to learn all the nuances of the game. Given he's only played football for 7 years. Ballpark?
6 years.
Pretty good football player for only being there and doing this for 6 years. And, goodness gracious, I should pull up his numbers here on PFF. That Virginia game, I guess I forgot how much of a throttling that Virginia game. He had 7 pressures against Virginia.
Dude, Brennan Armstrong gave up. He's just like, I'm just going to throw the ball in the air. Somebody go get it. I'm sick of this.
That poor kid. He had 32. I mean, 59 for Johnny Newton's a ridiculous number. 32 is a pretty good number for interior defensive lineman. And I'm glad you mentioned his versatility. He played nose at times. He's moved around. He's just kind of moved all up and down that defensive line. You're seeing him come into his own. And I'm with you. I think there's still a lot left to unlock with Keith Randolph as a football player. And the version right now is a pretty good one.
I always thought it made sense for Keith to come back because I feel like he was just scratching the surface, and I think he can raise his stock immensely. Johnny obviously did by coming back. Just coming back, he's all of a sudden first-round pick. But Keith, I think, can really elevate himself from maybe he would have been drafted last year. I think he can be, mid-round draft pick, maybe even higher if he really explodes, and I think he's got the talent to do so. So good as Lovie Smith for finding these and landing these 2 guys, but also Terrence Jameson's done a great job developing them. All right, let's move on here because the big question is the nose tackle competition to replace Calvin Avery. And again, kudos to Jameson. I thought Calvin Avery was really good last year. There are moments, and Jay Lehman and I pointed out in the film room a lot, where he was dominant. And that nose tackle position doesn't get a lot of the stats, doesn't get a lot of the flowers, but they take up space. They put pressure in people's quarterback spaces. That makes it really difficult. And they occupy people so that the rest of the defense can make plays. And I thought Calvin Avery did that extremely well. So we got a competition of Denzel Jackson, the Ohio transfer, pretty good pedigree from the Bahamas, had some major offers despite playing high school ball for the first time as a high school junior. And then T-Rod Edwards, who proved himself as a solid rotational piece. So, and the way they talk about Daxon, Joey, sounds like they're pretty comfortable with what they got.
Yeah, we wondered about that. He was wasn't he close to when spring ball started? He was fairly late.
Yeah.
We say late in the sense of the cycle to get him in for spring ball. But I thought we had gone through most of the offseason assuming this was T-Rod Edwards' job. Probably pretty comfortably assuming that. But it sounds like Denzel Daxon during fall camp, training camp, it's not fall yet, it's 100 degrees outside, has really turned it on here and has really put himself, I think, into both of our minds, into the mix and the realistic starter for this team. And will he start? I don't know. But he's in that conversation. And minimally, you've got a 1A, 1B option with T-Rod Edwards. Now, you're going from Ohio to the Big Ten, right? And T-Rod Edwards is going into what will be his most significant playing time in the Big Ten. I still think there are fair questions about the nose guard, just as there were a year ago with Calvin Avery not having all that production. But I think Terrence Jamison has proved himself to be a good teacher of defensive line play, a good coach. And I think the fact that Daxon comes in and is in this mix in fall camp tells me probably more about him than it does T-Rod, because we saw T-Rod Edwards have fine reps in an Illinois jersey.
Yeah, T-Rod played significant reps last year, 200 plus, and I thought he was solid. I thought he was really good for the most part. I mean, it was a solid part of the rotation. I felt like nose tackle, you didn't worry a lot about depth at that position last year because Calvin played so well and T-Rod came in and was really solid. Daxon had big questions about when they brought him. In 2 years that he played at Ohio, he had 11 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. I mean, again, it's nose tackle, but there wasn't a lot there. But it seems like he's changed a lot since he's gotten here. The way Terrence talks about how he really puts more time in the film room than anybody in the defensive line, and knowing Johnny Newton, that says a lot. And he's a big dude. Like when he came in, he was a little bigger, kind of like Rashawn Wilkins was last year, but he's really trimmed up a little bit, but massive arms. He's bigger than T-Rod Edwards. So I think the physical traits are higher ceiling than T-Rod. He's been first up in with Johnny and Keith in some of the rotations that they've been doing that we've seen in practice. That tells me a really positive for Illinois, because I thought T-Rod Edwards was unquestionably going to be the starter, be solid piece. If they think Daxon's better, I think that's a really good sign. But both of them are going to be key parts of this defense because both are going to play.
Yeah, I don't think Illinois wants to be in a position where you have to rely on your starters in the defensive line to play the sheer amount of snaps that they had to play last year. And a lot of that really circles to Keith Randolph and Johnny Newton, but you would like to keep those guys fresh and rotate in and out. There's going to be a rotation one way or the other with T-Rod Edwards and Denzel Daxon. I expect those snaps to be pretty similar to one another at the end of the day. Obviously, whoever starts, I think, is going to have a few more, but those two are going to be big parts of this.
Yeah, and in a league, you got Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Like in this division, man, you got to have that nose tackle. And the fact that they feel like they got one, and maybe they got one in the future here with Jeremiah Warren, that's a big position. And Daxon's here for 2 years. T-Rod Edwards has 2+. Does he have 3? He's got at least 2 more years. That's a pretty good sign at that nose tackle position. All right, but the depth chart, Joey, this might be the concern, right? This is where we maybe get the concern, because Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, I expect Johnny to probably play 85+% of snaps, if not more, like he did last year. I expect Keith Randolph to see the field most of the time, 75 to 80% of the time. But who are you rotating in? How do those guys do? Seems like Ced McConnell is the next guy up behind Johnny Newton, and it's time for him. He's a redshirt sophomore. He's that last recruiting class of Lovie Smith, had another Power 5 offer, so there's talent there. But Terrence Jamison has said he's really improved a lot over the last year. And then you've got probably Bryce Barnes, walk-on out of Gibson City. He's been a stalwart, kind of walk-on for your program guy, earned that Tim McCarthy scholarship. So you know he's going to give you some toughness. But there's a drop-off to that next group. I mean, there's going to be, but the talent there, of missing recruits in 21 and 22, starting to show at that position.
Yeah, we knew it, right? We knew there was going to be that cliff when those recruiting classes just didn't bear a lot of fruit. They need this position to stay healthy. Because there's, I do wonder if you had to pick a freshman who is maybe, I know you mentioned Jeremiah Warren at nose. If you had to pick a freshman who maybe could find their way up into that mix, you would look at a guy like Alex Bray, who is an uber productive high school player. They liked what they got. He didn't have a lot of offers, but it sounds like reports have been pretty good on him, Jeremy.
JMO has raved about him. Says he's maybe among the best pass rushers in the group. Now, he's probably 270 pounds right now, 275, something like that. So he needs a year. They want him to be the developmental guy, but if there's an injury in front of him, maybe he's a guy who elevates into the 2 deep. Evan Kurtz, I want to mention him, former offensive lineman. He's just kind of a stout guy, not as quick as these other guys. Dylan Davis, also probably the 3rd string nose tackle they'd like him to be. He had a decent offseason. But, they're excited about Alex Bray and Jeremiah Warren. And Pat Farrell probably has another year or two developing, but he's a really long guy that I think eventually fills that Keith Randolph role. But defensive linemen, you'd like to redshirt a year and just develop them and technique-wise and in the strength and conditioning program.
And that's possible if you're healthy.
Yes.
This is the position more than any on the team that it's, if there's an injury, then because there's
the 2 main guys. Like if there's a nose tackle injury, maybe you can hold down the fort, but to Newton or Randolph, yeah,
it's not ideal. I am very curious. Ed McConnell, I know we talked about him as the most important backup, not named quarterback on this team. Stand by that, and I'm interested to see what he can do, because he's going to be a rotational guy. In an ideal world for Illinois fans, he's nothing more than a rotational guy, because that means the 2 guys are healthy in front of him. But he's really, this is a big year for him to show that when we're talking about this next year and Keith Randolph and Johnny Newton are in NFL camps, then it's okay. Ed McConnell is going to be that guy, or maybe plus 1 or 2 portal guys when you're trying to sell a really good pitch from your 2 defensive linemen. It's a big year for him.
Yep. Yeah, because you're counting on Ed McConnell to be one of those starters next year, and then are you having to go to a redshirt freshman? And Alex Bray, or probably have to go to the portal, probably, and you'll have a hell of a sell. But I think Alex Bray is going to be probably an important part of that, but Ed McConnell certainly is going to be that. That said, you got Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, who probably changed my season prediction. Like if they didn't come back, we're debating bowl team, right? Given what those guys mean to the defensive front. But with those guys in here, obviously expectations are very high.
I want to put you on the spot so bad at how many wins they change your prediction without giving away too much.
At least two, which I'm between 7 and 8. So that tells you they'd be like, I mean, you think about it, because like Gabe Akis and Seth Coleman are really good, but you have so many questions in the middle of your defense, on the back of your defense, right? Tariq Barnes probably getting a lot of tackles if those guys weren't back, but it might not be a good thing for Illinois. Phil Steele has this group ranked 5th. He has a 4-way tie for the top Big Ten defensive line, which is cheating. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa. I get the Penn State. Iowa's pretty good. I mean, Ohio State's obviously really talented. I think Illinois should probably be 3 or 4 on that list, but that's just me. Either way, this could be a dominant defensive line. If Denzel Daxon can be what Calvin Avery was last year, they're only getting better than what they were last year, which is insane.
I'll give him some credit. Does the defensive line mean defensive front, or does it mean defensive lineman? I think if you move in the front, they probably could move up that list. If it's just line, okay. I guess my issues with the 4-way tie. Just go 1 through 4, Phil. Yes. Come on. What are we doing here?
Make a call, man.
Yeah, I don't even remember what the question was. Were the reasonable
expectations for this defensive line?
I have the whole rundown of what we're going to talk about, and I just refuse to listen or look at it. Just ask you. Top. One of the top defensive lines in the Big Ten. And guess what? Those guys would tell you that's not high enough. I don't know that anybody believes in this defensive line and believes in Johnny Newton as much as Johnny Newton. And for as much as he believes in that, he believes in Keith Randolph. Like, they are justifiably very high on what they can be. And they've proven it. They've proven they are very, very good defensive linemen, the productive defensive linemen. There are some positions, Jeremy, running back being one, where you kind of have to, on this Illinois team, kind of have to look at what we think they could be. Yeah. We just got to look at what they've been. And what they've been has been pretty freaking good. And Johnny Newton's, I think he was the preseason defensive player of the year in the Big Ten. He's probably
Cooper DeJean was in the poll. Was he did the Big Ten actually release? I don't know if they did that.
You know what? I don't think he did. It was close, right? Like he's going to be in that conversation at the end of the year to be the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year.
He was on my top 3 last year, to be honest with you.
I mean, like, this isn't projecting production. This is real production that comes back with another year of strength and experience and coaching. It's going to be one of the top defensive fronts in the Big Ten.
Which is why my expectation for this team is pretty high. And this defense is still pretty high, despite losing that secondary. As you return all these guys up front, we think, oh, we'll get into the linebackers next time, but I don't think there's going to be a huge drop-off there. And a young, inexperienced defensive backroom's best friend is this kind of defensive line. So Johnny Newton should be in the NFL right now. Keith Randolph could be if he wanted to, or at least be in a training camp right now. They're playing for Illinois, and they're 2 of the best defensive linemen in the Big Ten. So this defense I expect to be pretty good. Obviously, a new coordinator could change things, but I think Brett Bielema has a good history of picking defensive coordinators too that you can rely on. So